What did I just watch? You believed it because you wanted to believe it.
Oh, maybe we shouldn't.
The desire was there, but would you actually do anything about it?
Set up like right next to them to look like a cock and balls, and I'm 12. Hooked up with some people on lawns. So
Is this a result of the institution itself? You could show me Stephen fucking Hawking, and I was like, I know more than him. You like sucking dick.
Ich Lugan. I like spooky boys, dum-dum.
Hey, stop that.
Welcome to the Yestalgia podcast. I'm Basil.
I'm Drew.
And I'm Amanda.
And today we are going to be talking about Heathers. Okay, synopsis now. Smart and dramatic Veronica is part of Westerberg High School's most popular and powerful clique, containing 3 other members all named Heather. However, Veronica is beginning to tire of their vitriolic cruelty, and with the help of new kid JD, begins to take revenge on the bullies of Westerberg High. And we'll talk about the rest on the podcast. I believe in terms of what our experiences are, I think I may have been the only one that's seen it.
No, I hadn't.
I had never seen it nor even heard of it.
So it sounds like, yeah, you're the only one.
Have either of you ever heard of it before?
I've heard the name.
Okay.
Never even heard of it, not once, which was honestly a little bit shocking considering the actors that were in it and the time that the film was released.
I mentioned this the other day. I guess upon release, it was kind of a flop, which might be part of it. So now it's mostly like a cult classic kind of film at this point. Yeah, I have seen it before. I think I first saw it in high school on cable. So I probably saw a very
heavily edited
version. But since then, I have seen it a number of times. Sometimes, see, when it's on late at night, they don't censor anything. So I have seen it then too. But yeah, I always really enjoyed it. It's, you know, a little like some of the other movies we've done, including one I picked. So yeah, you guys want to chat about it now?
Yes, this movie was nothing like I thought it would be from the name. I thought it was like a predecessor to Mean Girls, which in some ways it is similar to that, but with a much darker twist.
Yeah, it's hilarious. I was trying and failing to schedule the release of our first episode. And so I got on voice chat, and Drew, you got on too, just to kind of give feedback. And I was working on getting Nim out, and you were like, have you watched Heathers yet? And I was like, no, not yet. And you were just sort of like, you were like speechless. Like I could tell there were so many thoughts, but you just couldn't find the words.
Yeah, this is a movie.
It's a hell of a movie.
It's hard to start, I think, on this one. I will say I did keep kind of comparing it a little bit to my previous pick, which was Clueless, where I think that this film does the satire significantly better.
I agree. I said that The Craft was anti-Clueless. I kind of think this is the anti-Clueless.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is a challenge for me in a not dissimilar way than Repo the Genetic Opera. But part of me liked it. I felt like the writers and the directors, I felt like the film crew, the camera direction, everything, I felt like it was extremely well done. And I felt like people cared very much about this movie. It has a lot more heart than Clueless.
Easily.
Yeah.
I had read somewhere that it was intended to be the anti-John Hughes movie. Because at the time, there had been several John Hughes movies that had come out and were very, very popular. But if you are familiar with them, as I am, because I love them.
I was thinking this seemed very John Hughes-like, but not. Like you said,
yeah.
It meant to be an anti-John Hughes film. So that explains it.
Yeah. So it takes some of the tropes that I think show up in John Hughes films a lot, but will sometimes skewer them, or sometimes they're just there as is. But yeah, in the worlds of John Hughes movies, they tend to be a little more cheery and hopeful and things like that, where I think that this movie is, it is a dark comedy, basically. So It goes to pretty dark places.
For folks like me, what is a John Hughes movie?
16 Candles, Pretty in Pink.
Ferris Bueller, yeah?
Yep, you're right. Ferris Bueller, Breakfast Club, 16 Candles, Pretty in Pink. Those are the kinds of ones that it is meant to be. Weird Science. Those 80s, I don't know, they were silly and comedies, but they were like fairly light about high school, I would say. I mean, The Breakfast Club, you could argue, but it doesn't go anywhere near this, honestly.
Yeah.
The thing about Breakfast Club is it brings up issues, but it doesn't really explore them at all. It just sort of things almost said offhand in a way.
But let's not say anything about it.
By the way, my dad clearly abuses me, and then they don't talk about it again.
Yeah.
Whereas I think they do explore a certain amount of things that are A, more in depth, and B, better, if that makes sense. I did at some point, but we should probably talk about other things before. Want to talk about the costuming because I love costumes.
Of course.
I thought of you every single time. These very, very intentionally color-coded, beautiful costumes came on the scene. I was like, I get Basil's pick now.
Yeah. The color story is very interesting because they're clearly using it somewhat intentionally, or I believe they are.
To me, it was super... Yeah. It was like the writing was on the fucking wall with the color choices. Yet still, you are correct. It was interesting.
Yeah. So I think, obviously, if we can talk about this part first, I usually like to talk about this kind of stuff later on, but the girls each had a color that they always had at least one thing on them that had that color. So, and it's interesting, their colors seem to match their personality a little bit too. And I think that's pretty obvious when Heather Duke starts to take over Heather Chandler's place.
Red grungy.
Yes. And then starts wearing red. And at one point wearing almost all red. So yeah, so red would be associated with like power or aggressiveness. And that embodies Heather Chandler. And green is sometimes...
They reference that at the start.
Yeah.
When
they do?
They do. Yeah, she said, first off, you asked me to be red. I'm always red.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
Red Heather putting on that red scrunchie. Or one of the opening scenes, not the very, very opening. Or maybe it was. I don't know.
No, they show her at some point. I don't think it's in the opening scene, but maybe it is. I would have to watch it again. But Heather Duke is green, which can symbolize like envy, right? And Yellow could be
fear.
Or like sometimes it's considered cowardly, yellow-bellied. In the case of her too, though, yellow is sometimes considered happy. And I think that might have been a facade for her. I mean, it definitely was because later they kind of talk about that she has been feeling kind of a mess. And
like maybe it was a desire because she was the character that it was a stupid way that she did it, but she reached out like via basically she confessed her unhappiness.
And her true feelings, whereas a lot of the characters won't or don't do it, at least. But Veronica's color is blue, and she's kind of a gloomy writer, so makes sense. And then JD wears black, like, all the time.
Yeah.
But here's some exceptions. Heather Duke, even though her color is green, she sometimes has bits of red already. Even at the beginning when they're playing croquet, her skirt has a little bit of red. It's like a plaid skirt, and it has a little red in it. And there's actually a part where JD is wearing a red shirt underneath his black jacket. So I do think sometimes red is meant for power, but also for grabs of power in a way. But yeah, I fucking love the clothes. They're so good. They're so awesome. And it's also interesting because at Heather Chandler's funeral, the other two of the Heathers, even though one of them's a Veronica, are not really technically dressed appropriately for a funeral, right? Veronica is wearing blue instead of black, like a dark blue, but still. And then Heather Duke is wearing this like cocktail dress kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then Heather McNamara, although she has her little bits of yellow, like her earrings are yellow, she's wearing a fairly appropriate dress comparatively. Like she's wearing all black, but she still has the yellow on. And I do think that's interesting that they always have like something that is that color. Like even if it seems like, oh yeah, maybe they're not wearing their color, they are. Because Heather McNamara also wears a cheerleading uniform at one point, but she's also wearing, I'm trying to think, I think it was a watch that was yellow as well. And of course, the pills that she takes are yellow.
I didn't notice that part. See, it's stuff like this that, so I'm going to be real with you. After I turned this movie off, I was sort of with Drew. I was just sort of like, what did I just watch? Like, I know what I just watched.
Had to compose yourself a bit.
Because it was presented. But here's the thing. I knew what I had just watched. It wasn't like disorganized or bad storytelling or poor writing. All of that was good. All of it was extremely good. For some weird reason, it was just so hard to swallow. And I want to almost blame it on the camera direction. And this just could be, I don't know, me and the way my brain works. I found the camera direction to be extremely jarring. Like, it was comedy camera direction, but with very, very dark, dramatic, angsty material. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I think that was very likely purposeful. You know what I mean?
Juxtaposition.
Yeah. Like, that was purposeful because I had mentioned before, it is supposed to be the anti-John Hughes, right? And that is sort of the way like a John Hughes movie would be filmed. Mm-hmm. I think, you know what I mean? I'm not an expert on that kind of thing, but it was very similar. It's just the darker version. And I do think like most movies that have pretty dark subject matter, even if they're dark comedies, don't do that. They usually kind of have a darker palette in general everywhere and things like that. But I think it was another element of the satire, but it's an element of the satire to film it unlike a dark movie because it is still technically meant to be a comedy.
Yeah.
Even if it's a dark comedy.
It was filmed kind of bonkers, and I don't know, I need to actually look. Because I was getting big time, and it wasn't just because of Winona Ryder and because of the gentleman who was the funeral preacher.
Yes, because he was also in Beetlejuice.
Yeah.
Because of that camera direction. But it was almost like...
His name is Glenn Shaddix.
Glenn Shaddix?
Shaddix.
Beetlejuice came out in the same year. Imagine that. So that's another thing that I liked about this movie, that I got really, really hyped about in this movie, was going back to the content of the film. Red Heather does at one point say something like, oh, bulimia, that's so 1987.
Yeah.
So that was a good year for Winona Ryder.
Yeah. Well, this didn't do well, so kind of not.
Right.
One good, one not so good,
yeah.
You know.
But she kind of begged to get this role.
Yeah, I did see something about that as well. It's interesting you mention the eating disorder thing. They sort of imply that her bulimia actually came from Heather Chandler in a way. And when that sort of cruelty and obsession about the way they looked was kind of gone, she started just eating again and not getting rid of anything.
You can be in a toxic relationship and have it not be romantic.
Mm-hmm.
For sure.
But I also think that was a slight way, in her head at least, that Veronica justified killing Heather.
Oh, for sure. Like, in the beginning, at the very least, Heather Chandler is like the conductor, I guess, of the cruelty that they inflict upon, because none of the other girls have these ideas stated by them. You know what I mean? They might go along with Heather, but I don't think any of them ever actually come up with these sort of cruel things. And right. The other two, again, until the sort of turning point for Heather Duke, don't initially say things that are super duper cruel. I mean, they do a little bit, but again, they're not initiating it, if that makes sense. They're going along with it, but they never start it, if that makes sense.
They're kind of just stooges.
Yeah. I mean, especially Heather McNamara, but Heather Duke also wishes she was Heather Chandler. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's interesting. So she's clearly, I've always questioned, how did Veronica get in this group? Why did she even want to be in it? And why did she stay? Because she does not like any of these things. She doesn't seem to actually like them at all.
She's aware of everything.
Popularity is a hell of a drug.
Yeah.
This is true, I guess.
I guess I just wish they had shown what she felt like the benefit was for herself. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I read the synopsis. I have not seen the musical. There is a musical based off of this. Started in Off-Broadway in 2014. That in that one, they sort of show her desire to get in. Like, it happens so that you get that sort of extra bit at the beginning of her becoming a Heather. Like, she's not just a Heather at the beginning of it. And I assume, again, I have not seen it, that it does give better context to what benefit did she feel like was happening to become a Heather?
I think I might have not the perfect puzzle piece, but if you smash it in hard enough, it might work. In regards to the point that you just brought up, in my notes, I actually wrote, why is the prodigy so gullible? And I did a little squiggle down because I kept on watching the movie, and JD drops this line, and it's just, he says, you believed it because you wanted to believe it. And I sort of think,
yeah,
that is why she's with the Heathers. Like, you're doing what you want. It's a control thing for her almost. Even though she's doesn't feel very in control in the beginning, she's like, I'm making whatever choice I want, and that makes it within my control. She's believing in the sort of enchantment of the Heathers clique because she wants to.
Yeah. And that's fair. I do think that is a fair assessment of what you're saying. Like, there's this, whatever it is, she wants to believe, like, oh, we're not that bad, or like, it's not so horrible that like we're not hurting anybody that bad, right? That is fair.
I also sort of saw her as a doorstop to the Heather, especially the Red Heather's evil. I almost felt like she existed within their clique to sort of be that shut-off valve.
But she never does.
She kind of failed.
Her protestations are weak. They're barely there. She lets Heather Chandler walk all over her for a lot of the beginning of the movie. It is only at the Remington party that she finally says something. But her protestations are like, oh, maybe we shouldn't. Oh, okay, we will, whatever, you know? And it's like she knows her conscience is saying something, right? Like, this is wrong. But her will is not strong enough to say anything or do anything about it.
It's almost like she has this justification of, well, I tried.
Yeah. And it's like, but you didn't, really. And I think that's sort of the point. And some of what ends up happening with JD, it's like, these desires are actually in you. I can see them. Now, are they 100% in her? I don't think so. Like, not the homicidal ones as much.
Desire to kill Heather C was. She wrote in her diary.
Yeah. But I mean, that's the kind of thing where it's like, oh, I'll fucking kill you. You know what I mean?
Yeah. The desire was there, but would you actually do anything about it? No.
Yeah.
Not without JD.
Yes. I do think it's interesting. The first one is technically an accident, right?
Yep, on her part.
Yes. Although JD could have stopped her. So he knew that was going to happen.
He acted so surprised, too.
Right.
Yeah.
He could have stopped her when he noticed.
Yeah.
He did it on purpose. She didn't.
Yeah. And the thing is, I don't know that he thought his actions through exactly. So I do think once it happens, he's like, ah, fuck. We have to figure something out. Because the only reason I think that is because her table breaks, but there's still the legs of it stay upright and they're really thick. And she has two things on her table. One is a magazine and the other one is the Spark Notes of The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath, which is kind of, if you're reading that, it's sort of code for you're depressed in a way. Like, Sylvia Plath, if you don't know, was a writer who attempted suicide many times. I believe she finally succeeded at one point. And yeah, some of her writings were about suicidal thoughts. So they show that he notices that, and that is how he comes up with the plan. So I don't know how much of it he really thought through. He was gonna do it. Didn't think they were gonna end up doing it because Veronica was like, no, we're not doing that, right? And then saw the opportunity. Do you know what I mean? Like, it seems like some of the things he's doing are slightly based on reaction, immoral reaction, but still not like premeditated.
We can't talk about JD yet. Not yet.
Okay.
There's a lot to say about him.
Yeah. Like, the floodgates will open.
Then I will talk about something much lighter. When they go out for a quote unquote game of croquet, so JD and Veronica, and then they end up fucking on the lawn, they're panning over showing their clothes were being taken off. And then there's a croquet mallet and balls set up like right next to them to look like a cock and balls, which I thought was so funny when I noticed it. Because it's so stupid and silly and sort of took me off guard when I noticed it. But I just wanted to mention that because it was so funny. And I'm 12. The other thing is, I think I'm going to compare this, particularly because I was so disappointed with my last choice. But the comedy, I think, was more successful than Clueless as well. Like, I actually chuckled aloud a couple times. You know, like, not all the time, obviously. Not every joke worked for me, especially because some of them were topical at the time, but no longer are. But yeah, like, I just felt like most of the comedy they tried was at least witty, and some of it I actually chuckled about. So
to build upon that, I made the complaint about Clueless of who the fuck's high school experience is this?
Yeah.
The answer is no one's. Now, I can also say the same statement of Heather's.
Yeah.
However, it's not a complaint because this movie doesn't really set itself up to be through the lens of an actual teenager. It's almost satirical. I guess this is sort of what you guys were talking about with the John Hughes thing. It's almost like you're really not supposed to relate to this.
Yeah.
It's very tongue-in-cheek. I think it's very self-aware.
Very.
Was it difficult to watch? Yeah. And for me, I think that I've already talked about the camera work. Also, some of the dialogue, especially when they were, what the hell did she say? Fuck me softly with a chainsaw.
Yes.
So that's good. But by the end of the movie, I sort of felt like I had been listening to, I don't know, a 15-year-old who hasn't really learned how to cuss yet and where the fuck word belongs.
It might be on purpose.
Yeah, because they're 15, 16, right?
I never could figure out how old they were because it never specifically says, except for the fact that Ram and Kurt keep saying, we're seniors. We're too good for this because we're seniors, and then doing it anyways. But that doesn't mean they're not older than the Heathers, you know?
Somebody says we're super popular and we're only juniors or something like that. It's mentioned one time.
16, 17?
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you caught that because I could not figure it out. I kept waiting for them to say something really obvious.
These supposed children were having like full-blown adult breakdowns. Like Veronica at the party leaning against the wall and sliding down the wall. Or maybe it wasn't at the party. There was one scene, I want to say, where she leans against the wall and slides down the wall. And she's just like, oh. And I looked at her and I was like, full-blown adult breakdown. No child breaks down like this.
Yeah. I mean, that's not true because I was a very depressed teen. So I broke down all the time.
I was too. However, I wasn't fucking on my croquet lawn. I was playing BattleTech and being depressed. And I was watching Tenchi Muyo and being depressed. I was not getting laid. There we go.
Hooked up with some people on lawns. So actually, they were more like public parks. But anyhow.
Good for you.
Yeah. I think the thing is that, like, these things going on don't feel that unfamiliar to me. I mean, they're clearly very big exaggerations, right? But the being a part of a friend group and somebody kind of fucking sucks and you feel powerless, you feel like you're stuck, I guess. Like, I look at it from an adult lens and I say, you were a fucking idiot. Just say something, just do something. But there is that feeling sometimes when you're in high school, when you have this group of friends and you feel like, I don't know who I will have. It would create a big thing because we have classes together. I cannot leave and I cannot break up this friendship with someone, even though it is really toxic, you know?
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys ever had that kind of experience, but I did.
I was very much the BattleTech nerd.
I didn't know anybody that had the same hobbies with me, so it was like kind of miserable.
Aww.
But yeah, I'll say there were things about it that felt real to me in a way, or akin to my own high school experience. Drew, do you have, I know Amanda said not at all, but Drew, do you have any feelings? I know that they are all women, so that might be a little bit different, but.
I don't actually have high school experience, so I can't.
Sorry, I forgot you said that.
Me too.
Yeah, so all my high school experience comes through movies and shows.
Yeah. And I think the interesting part about high school is there are benefits to going to public school, right? Which would include like socialization and things like that.
Yeah.
But like we were talking about, there can be some really negative things going on there too.
Cult-like, because I will not discount that there are these very toxic cliques because I would witness them. But man, it's almost cult-like. It almost makes me wonder, when I watch these kind of movies, I'm like, is this a result of the institution itself of public education? Or is this some type of fucking survival instinct? Is this some sort of caveman instinct of human teenagers? Is this a survival technique?
I think even while going through puberty, you're still kind of developing your own kind of sense of empathy and care for other people. And so I think even though you've gained some of that, right, just from being a human being up until the point that you enter high school. But I do think it's because you are still developing. These things will happen. But I also think it's because you are mixing different people from different backgrounds together. And so a lot of times the people being cruel and being shitty, you have to consider, where is that coming from? Where did they learn that? Because they must have learned it somewhere.
Is it like a social construct, or is this some sort of survival necessity? And by the way, as I was watching this with a coworker that I did not really know very well during liquor inventory, I kept thinking to myself, there were some scenes where I was like, this is just like my 3-year-old. This looks like a tantrum that my 3-year-old would throw. This looks like some smart shit my 3-year-old would try. And I'm not a psychologist, but I have read before, and I'm not claiming this to be perfectly true or whatever, but I've several occasions I've read from different sources that the process that the toddler brain is going through is super duper duper similar to the growth process of the teenager brain. And it's basically like they're bonkers. They cannot be reasoned with. They are totally convinced that the reality that they are perceiving at the very moment they perceive it is what is true and permanent and right and forever.
Yeah.
I kind of felt like I had spent the whole day with my kid after I watched that because I was so exhausted from this sort of, everything was just life or death. Every stupid, fucking ignorant, meaningless little thing was life or death.
Do you remember feeling that as a teenager? Because I remember feeling that way as a teenager a lot of the time.
I don't remember feeling like life or death, but I will tell you this. I was 10 times smarter than anybody else when I was 15. You could show me Stephen fucking Hawking, and I was like, I know more than him. And I believed it.
Oh my God. Yeah, that's fair. That is fair. And I do think all teenagers go through things like that. Like, yes, you know so much. And I think part of it is because you are in a place where you're learning a lot of things at once, like social things and actual like book learning things. And it makes you feel powerful in a way. And I think that's why some of these kind of bully stuff happens, because I'm going to blame it on generational trauma kind of stuff where the parent does not know how to cope because their parents did not know how to cope and their parents did not know how to cope. You know what I mean? And so it just kind of continues as a cycle. And if you're not acknowledging that, and you're not able to as a teenager because you think you know everything, you continue on a cycle of, well, this is how I'm supposed to process my feelings, or this is how I'm so supposed to react to this kind of situation, you know, and that may not be correct.
This is the only place I have to express my feelings, and this is the only place where I have control.
Yeah. And it's particularly interesting in relation to Heather Chandler because she has that kind of thing, which I think is interesting that we have seen before, particularly, again, in Clueless. I'm sorry to bring it up again, but where this is a character who is young, so doesn't know that much, but thinks she does, so says absurd things as if they were fact. You know what I mean?
Sure does. The opening sequence of the cafeteria really pissed me off. What the hell is this poll of the week shit?
I think she worked for the newspaper.
Okay, can we just stop? The question was, if you inherited $5 million and a couple days later, some aliens showed up.
If you won $5 million, same day that aliens said they were going to destroy the Earth, what would you do?
A couple days later. 6 1, half dozen the other. What would you do? Let's answer that right now. Drew, what would you do? It's a dumb fucking question.
Yeah, it is. Because there's nothing to do. Why would you do anything? You're going to die that day or the next day.
I would do $5 million worth of drugs.
I kind of liked her ex-friend Betty's answer, which is just throw a fucking party. Have as good a time as you possibly can.
End of the world party.
Yeah.
Even the girl who said, I would give it to the homeless. All of it.
Well, she was fucking lying. And I think that's part of what they were saying about that particular group of friends, right?
Mm-hmm.
That they and the kid who dated Heather one time and she said he was boring, but he wasn't because it turns out she was just dissatisfied with her life. That kid. Yeah, he is the same too. Those are the people they kind of, I think, zoom in on purpose to show you this kind of falseness that is happening, this facade that people are putting on. And a lot of the people in school are, I think.
I did have to rewind several times through the cafeteria scene.
To see all the clicks?
Not to see all the clicks. I don't know. This could have been a conglomeration of things. It could have been me personally, my auditory processing. I will say, I turned the captions on and the movie suddenly started making a lot more sense. So it could have been my auditory processing. It could have been the writing, and it could have been the acting. I don't know who to blame, but I was like, are they fucking speaking English? I was so goddamn confused. My head was spinning because so much shit was happening, even from the opening lines where Veronica is sitting on the stairs and she's writing some sort of letter that was like, Heather told me that she can give you wings and make you soar or something like that. I'm like, what are we doing? What is this? What are you talking about? The whole aliens are going to destroy the earth question. I was like, I don't understand why she's doing this. I really do think that this movie maybe this movie is meant to be watched multiple times. I don't know, but I sort of feel like that's a detriment to a movie.
I think that you are correct. They put too much information in one thing without giving you the context of that information. So I only figured out that Heather was the poll had to do with the newspaper because of scenes later where they're talking about the poll for the newspaper, right? Like that's the only way I figured it out. So why she's going around doing that, we don't know.
Power move. She just gets to walk around and quiz everybody.
Yeah.
It was dominance assertion. Like, I'm going to ask you a dumbass question. You have to answer.
Well, and I think it still is a power move. So first of all, she gets to choose the question of the week. She mentions that to Heather Duke. She mentions that because she figured that out in study hall with Heather Duke and then shits on her because she's like, Heather, you were there. You know what the question is. And I just think it's still a power move, A, because of that, and B, because of the way she asks. And she kind of uses it to judge the people that she asks as well. So like, yeah, that too. So you aren't wrong, I don't think. I think it is partially a power move for her. It is flexing her own dominance a little bit. Yeah.
Can we please talk about this poor girl? I cannot remember her first name. Something dump truck.
Dunstock, I know is her actual last name. Martha Dunstock. Yeah. Yeah. That was pretty shitty.
Who was revealed to be a former, I won't say revealed because they kind of just flat out said it. She was a former good friend of Veronica, and Veronica left.
Heather Duke, actually.
Was it Heather Duke? I could have swore because of the last scene that it was Veronica.
No, she's just befriending her because she knows that she's been tormented a lot. It was Betty that she was once friends with.
Right.
Which, to be fair, in the musical, they become one character.
Did we all notice? They're baiting Veronica.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I did notice that. And it's funny because they kind of are dressed like that. Like, at least in the first one where, like, Betty has a high blonde ponytail and she has, like, short, dark hair. Although Veronica usually has longer hair, but still. I did notice that.
Who had the orange ball that was playing with Veronica?
When?
She had big...
Oh, with Betty?
Somebody was playing...
Later in the movie, right?
Way later in the movie, someone played croquet with Veronica, and she had an orange ball. And
yeah, that was Betty.
Betty, yeah.
Okay, and I also noticed, back to the color theory, orange is complementary to blue.
Like the opposite, yeah. That is interesting. I hadn't thought about that at all. Yeah, there is a lot of color story going on here. But yeah, I get to say this because I'm also fat. I like that the fat person was actually fat because in movies, sometimes they cast a person who's like a size 8 and then say they're fat. And you're like, what? Since when? So I do appreciate that there is someone who's supposed to be fat and they are actually fat. I know that's like a weird thing to say, but as a fellow fatty, it's nice to see, even though it is somebody who's being considered the person to be mocked because of that.
So in high school, I was a small child. I was not considered fat. However, I was deemed quite ugly.
Aww.
So that scene with her and the forged note from the jock, I sort of had conflicting feelings because I think I probably have had that done to me in school before. But let me tell you, I would never, never, never have gone up to the table and said, here's this note that you wrote me. What are your thoughts? No, I would have automatically assumed right off the bat that was a fake letter. And that has sort of continued throughout time. Like, that's a sort of sad scene for me because that's the sort of thing that creates long-lasting insecurities.
Yeah.
To where now as an adult, if someone were to leave me a note that was like, hey, I think you're great, I would have been like, what do they want? What kind of trickery is this?
I do know somebody who mentioned that exact thing basically happened to them before. Something like that kind of happened to me. And it didn't turn out how they had hoped because it wasn't a note. It was a boy who came up and said, hey, my friend thinks you're cute and wants to go out. What do you say? And I was like, no, thank you. And he said, what? I said, I don't want to date your friend. And he was like, what? Do you think he's cute? And I was like, not really. I was like, I wanted to be like, I like spooky boys, dum-dum.
Yeah, that scene just kind of hurt my heart.
Yeah.
But I feel like it was redeemed in the very last scene, which I loved, where a dusty explosion debris covered Veronica kind of saunters through the halls and is like, hey, you want to kick it? I loved it.
And then Que Sera plays.
She says, my date skipped out on prom. Do you want to hang out on prom instead?
You skipped out for the afterworld.
Yeah. But she also kind of, by asking that, she sort of is saying that there's no way Martha has a date to the prom. That's kind of mean.
I'm going to choose to ignore it.
I mean, Veronica's trying in that moment. Like, I realize that. But I am saying that is kind of an interesting assumption to have that she won't have a date to the prom.
He is also critically injured.
That's fair. That is fair.
But that would have been a funny moment. She asked her if she wanted to watch movies instead. She said, oh, actually, I have a date.
Right.
Who wants to speak on J.D.?
Jason Dean.
Yeah.
He's obviously styled to look kind of like James Dean.
Yep.
Also, this was considered his breakout role, the one that got him a lot more work.
As it should. So, this pumped up kicks motherfucker.
Yeah.
I had a little bit of, and I love this word, a little bit of whiplash with him. In the very, very beginning, in the cafeteria scenes, he annoyed me, much like everything else in the cafeteria scene. Because he is just like zeroed in on every little thing they are saying, every little thing they are doing. He is taking it all in. He is the observer.
Stalkerish.
And he has that fucking smirk on his face.
But all in all, that's the least worst thing he's done.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's true.
Correct. In my notes, I wrote the sentence, the most wholesome passive aggression between JD and Dad. And then underneath it says ... until it wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
I thought the whole, hey, son, aren't you going to introduce me to your girlfriend? Or like, hey, Dad, you know the thing I'm talking about.
The role reversal.
It was cute at first. Yeah.
It was. I was like, this is the cutest passive aggression I've ever seen. But then it got not cool. And I did not understand, and I don't think the movie cared if I understood the whole domestic terrorism aspect. I wanted to know, why is the dad doing this? Why is their life like this? I didn't understand the whole thing with the mom getting blown up in the library. And I don't think the movie cared.
They do explain it a little bit. First, when JD and Veronica were in the 7-Eleven or whatever it was, when they come out, she goes, oh, Dean, like Big Dean's something construction. So the dad works for a construction company, or like he owns a construction company. So that's why he's like blowing up buildings.
I missed that.
Yes. And then with the mom, she committed suicide by walking into one of the buildings that was going to be demolished.
I suspected that, but it didn't spell it out for me.
Well, he says to her, remember I said the last vision I had of my mom was her waving from a window. And then he says something like, she had walked into a building that my dad was going to demolish 2 minutes before or something.
But I still didn't put together. I was like, where was the misunderstanding? I was like, I must be missing a piece of the story. But okay.
No, it seems like, honestly, I think based on JD's attitude about things and when it sometimes mimics his dad kind of fucking sucks.
Extremely fucking sucks.
Yeah, so he's like clearly kind of an asshole. It seems like very likely that his mom partially did it to get away from him. Yeah.
So JD can't fully, mostly, but can't fully be blamed for his actions in this movie because the way his dad is and the fact that he spent a long time without his mother. So, nature versus nurture, this whole thing, plus obviously mental illness.
Yeah, there's not much nurture, clearly, right?
Yeah, right.
He can't have lived a life full of love, particularly once his mom was gone, right? Like, his dad should not be a fucking dad. Like, very clearly should not be a father to someone.
So both of you have hit the nail on the head. And this was another part of the movie that hurt me, kind of like the fake love letter in the beginning. The whole cute, hey, son, and the whole reversal of their roles at first seemed funny and cute. Like, I laughed at it. I was like, oh, that's funny. But the more when you see JD's end result, when you see his end game, for me, and this totally might just be me reading my own personal life into this character because I love compelling villains, there is such a thing as an adult child of a dysfunctional parent.
Yeah, adultification of a child, yeah.
You are my caretaker, and even though, again, I might be totally reading into this, when I saw the way JD's story kind of ended, even before it ended, when I saw where it was headed, this is totally a thing a quote unquote adult child would do. You're expected to be your parent's parent, maybe?
Yeah.
And he even says, no one loved me. In heaven, everyone loves each other. He didn't get the father part. He might have gotten the mother part, and then even worse, had it stripped away. So I do have immense sympathy for this character. I love compelling villains. There are scenes in this movie, you guys. Am I the only one? Sometimes he would show up in a tense scene, and I would be like, oh, thank God, JD, do something. Like, I had that feeling when the nerd was getting beat up by the football guys, and they were like, do you like sucking dick? And the nerd was like, you like sucking dick? And
and then he was worse, yeah.
Which, good for him, for standing up for himself.
Yeah, for real.
Even though it got to be down.
He rolled up on his motorcycle, and he just gives them this soldiering look. And I'm like, yeah, get him. Like, that's a good villain. When you root for the villain, sometimes that's a fucking well-written villain. Voila.
I think you are definitely supposed to root for him up until a point, right?
Yeah.
And I would argue it's probably around the time after they kill Ram and Kurt. Although, I'm kind of...
I mean, yeah, because the first one, he killed the Wicked Witch.
Yeah. And technically, while he could have prevented it, it was still technically an accident, right?
Yeah.
Like,
that's the other thing. Plausible deniability. He never really did anything, did he? It was all plausible deniability. It was like, whoops, well, that's a thing that happened.
Until, like Bill said, Ram and Kurt, he shot both of them.
Oh, he hunted them down. He hunted that one dude.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He didn't even seem truly worried. Like, if it were me, I would have been way more nervous than that. I would have been missing shots all over the place. And yeah, no, he hunted that guy down like a fucking dog.
I mean, technically, Veronica shoots him in the end, though.
Under his direction, he was like, now, do it. Yeah. He didn't do it. She did.
Yeah. But he did shoot the first one. I believe it was Ram who got shot first. What he tells her about the bullets, he calls them Ich lügen bullets, which in German is I lie.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So he literally is telling her that he's lying without outright saying it. And I think if you at all know that going into it, you're like, oh, fuck, this one's so premeditated. for sure. There is no question about it that this is premeditated murder.
I'm just going to say, even without knowing that at all, it still comes across.
That's true. But theoretically, because it's a movie, you could believe what he's saying. Hard to believe what he's saying, but you could.
You don't trust him at that point, though.
It feels like the reason he chooses them has to do with they said mean things about my girlfriend. Which, fine, they said horrible things. They did something really horrific. But also in the scene where she goes on the date with Heather McNamara, it looks like in the background, she's getting SA'd by whichever one. I think it was Ram.
He is.
Kurt.
Yeah. Kurt, yes. She said she had sex with him. She didn't call it what it appeared to be. But it's like, that's way more upsetting than spreading rumors.
He had selective righteousness.
Yeah.
And that things that I didn't like about him. If he would have just had across the board, this is my alignment. I am righteous evil. This is what I do. I love a righteous evil character. He would have been perfect. But I think, too, that was sort of meant to reflect on the way that Veronica felt about him, because he would show up in scenes and I would be like, oh, thank God he's here, such as in the scene you just described. He showed up, I'm like, thank God he's about to shoot somebody, and then he wouldn't do anything. Yeah. And I think that reflects Veronica's feelings toward him. Like, she wants to trust him. He's got these moments where he is sort of this dark horse hero, but it's selective at the end of the day. It's all him. It's whatever he chooses. He's in control, and he
didn't do anything in the moment, but he did eventually.
Yeah. I mean, and there's something to be said about that a little bit, but it does seem like the things that spur him into actual action are not just seeing there's injustice, right? Like, there's something else. Usually it's when Veronica is in some sort of peril, be it real or not.
He also, as I said, he requires plausible deniability. So if he were to have been like, hey, stop that. If he were to have started conflict when Yellow Heather was getting assaulted as she was, it would have been too direct. It would have been too obvious. He wouldn't have had any lies. He wouldn't have had any cover. He wouldn't have had any patsies. He wouldn't have had anyone to blame. It would have been too direct. So that's a testament to the character.
That is true. Like, except that I think the biggest turning point for his character isn't even that, right? Because like you said, he has certain plausible deniability going on there. But then when he basically makes Heather Duke into Heather Chandler or pushes her into that, you're like, oh, he's just looking for an excuse now. Because would she really have done any of that without him?
I don't think she would.
Yeah, she's kind of sniveling.
Like I said with Veronica earlier, she might have desired it, but she wouldn't have done it without him.
Yeah, fair.
Yeah, he made bad ideas seem like very good ideas.
It's not like I don't think that there was something in her heart, something about her that she wanted that, but like you said, it wouldn't have happened. She needed a bit of a push.
I even think that him acting as the catalyst to her, and this was another part of the movie that I didn't quite understand, so I might not be speaking accurately. I didn't quite understand. It almost felt like he was egging Green Veronica on in secret.
Yeah. He didn't tell anyone, and the only way that Veronica even found out was because Heather Duke said it out loud at one point.
Yep.
She would not have known. He would not have told her.
Right. And I think when she confronted him about it, didn't he lie again? Or
I think he sort of excused it a little. Like, I think he was like, it would have happened eventually, or like, that's what she wanted, or whatever.
Yeah, he was a compelling villain, a piece of shit, to be sure, on the record, but
a role that he plays well.
Yeah, the look on his face, the black trench coat, good character, good villain.
Something I read was he was trying to epitomize Jack Nicholson in his performance.
It worked. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, both of them play good villains.
Just real pieces of shit.
Yeah.
On screen.
All right, I'm going to bring up the whole thing about their plot to make it seem like Ram and Kurt were gay. And that has like problematic elements. But it does seem like the movie has its heart a little bit in the right place. I can't really tell.
I will tell you why. And I don't even really know how to explain this in words. It's the scene where JD pulls shit out of his bag and he's like, check out this quote unquote homophobic paraphernalia. He pulls out,
The mineral water.
Yeah. Mineral water.
after the mineral water. I laughed at, what was it? The Joan Crawford postcard and the mascara.
Yes.
It's almost like the movie was telling you, and this, again, might be me reading into it, the movie was telling you, isn't this ridiculous?
Yes. And I liked that because, in a way, it was skewering this sort of toxic masculinity a little bit, particularly with the mineral water.
Right.
Isn't this fucking tiresome, you guys?
Yeah. And then, of course, they do a scene because they do a better job at being really absurdist. And I think that works a little better for it to be clearly satire and clearly very funny. And by being over the top about everything, because they then have the scene where they're found and there are two police and one of them takes out the mineral water and was like, they're gay.
He's like, I've got it all figured out. And he pulls the water bottle out. He's like, I found some Perrier.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the thing. It's supposed to be absurd, and it is. So it almost seems like it is anti-toxic masculinity and pro-gay people are fine and normal. But, I cannot 100% tell, really, because it is a weird way they do it. And we hear the F slur a few times in the movie, so...
Well, I must be so used to hearing it, I didn't notice that.
Oh, yeah, a couple times. Ram and Kurt... when he pulls out the gun that doesn't have real bullets in it on them, they are calling him the F word.
And he says,
Yes.
okay, we all seem fine with assholes. Kaplow, kaplow. Which, how white culture is that?
That he didn't get immediately expelled.
Right.
It's also pre-Columbine, so.
When I first saw it, I thought that was I didn't know what kind of movie it was going to be. I thought that was like a dream sequence, like they switched to a dream sequence without any kind of notice.
I did too.
Well, particularly because the very, very first scene is a dream sequence.
Yeah, it kind of is. Okay, here's the story. I watched that very beginning dream sequence where they bonk her in the head with the croquet ball, and she's just kind of like, oh, fuck this, or whatever the hell she says. I watched that, and I was like, oh, this is going to be just a delight. This is going to be so funny. This is going to be so cool. I'm going to love this movie. Let's watch it with a near stranger during inventory. Woof. And it was one of those things where I had to save face. I had to double down and just keep on letting the movie play.
Did they say anything about it?
No, and you know what? I'm misrepresenting it. I know this person. I wouldn't consider them a pal, but I consider them a work acquaintance that I work with quite often, and we're amicable and we cuss at each other. So it might not be quite as bad as I'm letting on, but still, yeah. And no, he didn't say anything.
Okay. I do think it's really interesting. In this movie, it kind of shows a couple things where it's like, your parents make you who you are. Because Veronica has this laissez-faire attitude about certain things. And I think that's reflected in some of the scenes they have with her parents a little bit, being kind of almost turned off emotionally a little bit.
Oh.
On loop.
Yeah.
Someone please tell me why blank blank. Because you're an idiot?
Yeah.
Let's also mention her parents do have a half-assed intervention with her. You can't even say the word intervention. They're just like, we heard you might kill yourself. Okay, bye. Have fun in your room alone for hours on end. And then also, I'm going to call you over and over and over. No. I would be in your room with you, with the Uno cards, being like, let's flip it and reverse it, baby. There would be no way I would leave you alone.
Yes. Yeah, they are just so laissez-faire. And it transfers to Veronica, it seems like, because that scene that you mentioned, Drew, where, because you're an idiot thing, in both of those, in the first one, she's going to a party, and in the second one, she's going to a funeral, and she says the same exact thing, as if it's just somewhere she has to go. She says, well, I got a motor if I'm going to make it to that party, and then that funeral. And I'm wondering if that is meant to be kind of a bit of a character growth for her a little bit, to care more by the end.
Well, she kind of has to because of JD. She's got to be on her toes because this guy is unhinged. We thought he was, on her side. And then it turns out that no, he will throw her under the bus too, in the worst possible way.
Yeah, the very worst.
By killing her. Well, I think it's more like by the end, any of those things that bother her conscience, instead of doing nothing, because like that's what she learned, you just keep about your day, to actually be proactive. Because like I don't think Veronica at the beginning of the movie, if she found out that JD was going to blow up the school, she would have fought that hard like she did at the end.
Definitely.
So it is like an arc for her about like, I need to be proactive about things that test my morals.
You know what's weird?
Yes.
I went through the 7 stages of grief with this movie. And I was just, I don't want to say revolted because I was off-put. I will say that. There were things about this movie that off-put me. But now that we're hashing it out and like completely unpacking it, this movie is great. What the hell? Like, what happened?
I don't know. Like, I've had that experience before with movies where at first I come out of it being like, I don't like that. But when I examine it more or somebody talks about it in a more analytical way, I see it for those things now, too.
Not perfect, and it has things about it that I do hate. But again, you can tell people cared about this movie.
Yes.
For sure. And yeah, it is very popular now. Now that people are older, I think people were just far too uncomfortable about the subject matter in the late 80s to make this film a success.
It was too woke.
Yeah, not really.
I have so in 1987, I had working memories. I had living memories. And my aunts, my mom's younger sisters, were all very, very cool to me. They had the puff paint Gumby shirts. They wore leg warmers. They wore headbands and wristbands, and they crimped their hair, and they unloaded hairspray into their hair until it felt like deep fried spaghetti.
Yeah.
And I remember, because I lived in that house with them, my grandmother, I remember thinking they were so damn cool. And basically all of the 80s culture that I have stored away in my brain came from watching them, listening to the music that they listened to, and watching the movies that they watched, and hearing the shit that they talked about. And I can tell you guys, this movie was never mentioned.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. I also didn't know about it until I happened upon it one time.
I didn't know about the movie either. I've only heard of Heathers as the musical.
Yeah. So speaking of that, there have been 2 kind of rebooty type of, not exactly reboots, but 2 other iterations of the Heathers. So the musical, which got very popular, but was never on Broadway, interestingly enough. But it did go to the West End. And then there was a remake show in 2018 that was like pretty unanimously reviled because it was dumb and nobody could figure out what the target audience was supposed to be. Because in it, now all the Heathers were woke. But it also would, I don't know how to explain it. It couldn't appeal to anybody because it was almost centrist-y in its messaging. So like nobody that would like it did like it.
Pick a side, bro.
Yeah, kind of. And yeah, also in it, Heather Chandler does not die. So fuck that show. Like, they should have just made that girl Heather Duke instead and just did what they did in the movie where somebody looked up to this person so much and felt so powerless that they became...
They lived long enough to see themselves become the villain.
Yeah, pretty much. One of these one-off doesn't matter that much, but $5 million, which is what their Publishers Clearinghouse amount for their poll question was, today would be 13 million. Not as much as you'd think, but that's probably because when you're getting up in the millions, it's not as big of a difference. Or the numbers don't seem that big of a jump, but it's millions of dollars, so.
$12 trillion. What do you...
One place where I agree with JD.
What?
There's no such thing as a dumb question, but that's the dumbest question I've ever heard.
He did.
It is a very dumb question. I think that's particularly effective because he's saying it to Heather Chandler. Like, I'm sure she has never been talked to like that.
He doesn't care.
He was a good villain. God, I love... Oh, God bless good villains.
That's why that was one of my problems with Nim. Didn't have a good villain.
Yeah, it's true. Well, the humans, kind of. But yeah, it wasn't great. It didn't feel the way a good villain should feel.
Okay, so I drink coffee with just sweet and low, like black coffee, one sweet and low, rehab style. So I cannot justify buying a box of sweet and low. I don't know why. So I go around town just pilfering a little bit of sweet and low here and there, like from the Starbucks. And it's never from like a mom and pop place. It's always from like,
corporations.
Yeah. And I thought to myself, I was like, I understand now what the rats of Nim were doing. They were stealing Sweet and Low. They were just like, fucking steal Sweet and Low anymore, you guys. We have to buy the box. The box of Sweet and Low. The $6 box of Sweet and Low.
It was their electricity.
Yeah, like I couldn't put my finger on it. I was like, I don't feel like they felt bad about stealing per se. I just think it was kind of like a shameful thing. Like stealing 400 Sweet and Lows from the Starbucks. Can't do this anymore, guys. I gotta buy the box.
Yeah, that would make the most sense. This is sort of based on before, when we talked about Heather Chandler thinking she was worldly and then saying dumb shit because of that. She keeps talking about how great college guys are, and then the college guys are somehow worse. Maybe not worse, but they're at least the same as the high school guys, which was really funny. Yeah, because I remember in Clueless, Cher says, like, ew, high school guys.
Yeah.
I do think it's kind of interesting that they kind of are talking about everyone loves you when you're dead, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, they kind of contradicted a little bit later with Martha, where nobody cares that she tries to commit suicide. But JD says something along those lines, like, Heather Chandler's more popular now than she was in life. But I don't know if you've ever noticed when someone dies, everyone has something nice to say suddenly.
Right.
Even if you know that person was not a fan.
Mm-hmm.
The fucking cheerleading uniforms are insane.
You saw her
this? You saw like her mons pubis. Or her pubic mons, whatever. So that's the first thing. They don't have any bloomers on, which is like, that never happens. Second of all, they have these little gloves, these little fingerless part of their uniform as well. It's so stupid.
Yeah. You saw the whole fucking snatch.
Yes, that was very annoying because they zoomed in on it, basically. But yes, maybe in the 80s, but I really doubt it. They did not wear bloomers for cheerleading. I highly doubt that. I was a cheerleader before. I don't know if I mentioned that.
I guess I wasn't paying enough attention.
I mean, because they are not like a main part of the story, except when Heather McNamara wears it, really. And then they have to have like extras or something in them for that scene. But yeah, I get that. The other costumes were clearly a priority comparatively. But I just was like, what is happening with these uniforms? What the hell? These are so weird.
It was a serious anime crotch shot. Like,
yeah.
And it was a blink and you'll miss it type of scenario. So, Drew, if you did miss it.
Yeah, I guess I was blinking.
Yeah, you were blinking.
But on the subject of cheerleaders, they had so much mascot / school pride memorabilia or whatever stuff around their high school. It was so surprising because I'm like, I don't think my school had that. I don't remember anything close to like, I think there was like 2 murals and that's it. But we didn't have pennants. They had pennants everywhere. And like, it was even in the yearbook room. There was like another thing, but I was just so surprised.
Where was this movie supposedly set?
Iowa, because of the mineral water thing. They're like, this is the middle of Iowa.
Okay, so they don't have anything else to be proud of.
Fair enough.
Get a major sense of school pride from their football team and their cheer squad.
Yeah, and to be fair, they've redone the high school that I went to way over, and it might have all that now. Who knows?
We did. We had full-blown spirit days where people would pass around little ribbons that said, like, one of them said, and this is not going to make sense to you guys, one of them said, bottle the Bearcats. And it's because the Bearcats was another mascot of a different school. Like, we had full-blown rivalries in Texas, y'all.
That makes sense. Makes sense now that I'm thinking about it. But yeah, I've never experienced that at all. And like, Even our pep rallies did not normally happen during school. They were always after school, except this one where they said that it was mandatory that even though you didn't have to go to classes, you have to go to this pep rally. But you could get your parents to sign out that says you don't have to go, which my mom did, and it was awesome. I got to leave school early.
Oh, man. We were like, cool, a pep rally. We don't have to go to class. It was a big damn deal. That part of the movie was not at all weird to me.
Okay. It was weird to me, but clearly we had different high schools. I know that our school was like very big on hockey too, so that might be part of why hockey was their thing, and they were apparently very good. I don't know.
Wow.
Yeah, right?
I've never heard of that.
Yeah.
Really?
Like at school?
Yeah, they had a hockey team because I live in the Northeast.
No, we did football all the time.
Yeah, I mean, we had football, but it was, like I said, the hockey team was it for us, I think.
All football all the time.
Yeah, sounds like what I've heard of Texas.
Oh, we had all kinds of teams at least. Like football, basketball, baseball, field hockey, softball. Yeah, we had all kinds of different teams, but the hockey team was like the big one. In fact, actually, our school did have a diverse amount of sports, but hockey was supposedly the one that most people really went for. It was like a big deal.
Weird.
Well, it would never be like that in Texas. It's just cold here.
Weirdos.
And because it's cold here, that's probably why football wasn't that big, because there was a portion of the year you really could not play.
Freeze. Play in the ice.
Freeze your ass off.
Yeah.
And I was a cheerleader. I was a Pop Warner cheerleader when I was a child. And I would go and play out in the freezing cold. We had two uniforms. We had our warmer weather uniform and our hotter weather uniform. I mean, it was just instead of the top, you got a sweater for like the cold. But your legs got to still be out. Hooray.
You were still wearing like those shiny tan Hooters leggings, right?
I think I wore tights a lot and like warm socks and stuff. And they got mad at me because... Sorry. I'm just telling stories about my life now. They had this thing, and it was very annoying, where the cheerleaders... There was this ceremony thing, and the cheerleaders had to take a rose from one of the football players. And we were 10 or something. And the person I got was someone I didn't like, and I made a face.
Oh, no.
And they were so mad at me about it. And I was like, I know that person, though, and I don't like them. And I can't control my face.
How dare you be dissatisfied with your arranged partnership?
Yeah, your arranged heterosexual partnership. All the adults thought it was so cute. Now looking back, I'm like, that's gross, you guys.
You just unlocked a memory for me. My prom, I was so goth. I wish I could find my prom pictures. If I ever do, I'll show them to you. They are so tragic. I was very kind of like goth and nerdy and super, super queer. And I was a senior and I was like, okay, even though it is totally not my thing, I'm going to go to the prom because it's a life experience and I'm just going to take it, even if I hate it.
Senior prom, I take it.
Yeah, there was a rule that only juniors and seniors could just freely go to prom. If you were a sophomore or a freshman, you had to have a senior or a junior prom date. And one of my friends was like, God, I really want to go. And this was a girl. And I was like, okay, cool. Be my date. And they put the fucking kibosh on it. They were like, no, you can't bring her. Why? Because you're both girls. They just, yeah.
In Texas. Yeah. Whereas we had a GSA, Gay Straight Alliance.
I bleached my hair for the first time when I was 17 years old. I was a senior in high school. And the girl didn't leave the bleach in long enough. So it didn't lift to completely blonde. And it was very, what I would call, having managed a salon for a few years, it was brassy, okay? They banned me from school because they said I dyed my hair pink. It was literally just like coppery from not having to fucking develop in that long. And they were like, no, you can't come to school with pink hair. And I'm like, look, this is a faux pas.
This is sort of a line from the Heathers that people really glom onto, the I love my dead gay son thing.
When he said that, I was like, oh my God, this is where that comes from.
It's just like kind of silly to say it like that, I think,
Yeah.
is realistically what is going on. It could also be pointing out a certain hypocrisy, because would he be as accepting if his son was alive?
You wouldn't say I love my gay son, but I love my dead gay son.
Correct.
Yeah.
It's going along with the whole postcard of Joan Crawford. It's the absurdity that I think is kind of cool about this movie, even though they do throw around the F word that, I only remember once, but then again.
I think they say it a couple times, like when Ram and Kurt are beating up that kid at the funeral.
Is this movie secretly progressive?
I don't know. Like, that's the biggest thing about it, where I'm like not 100% on it, because the cast is not very diverse.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Not diverse.
That's actually something I was going to say. One of the only black guys in it is Phil Lewis, who a lot of people might know as Mr. Mosby.
The newspaper guy?
Yeah.
yes, from Zack and Cody.
Mhm.
I was like, why does that kid look familiar? It took me quite a while to figure it out.
No, you're right. He was literally the only black person in the entire movie was that guy.
I'm pretty sure that's correct.
And it was like for maybe 35 seconds.
Yep.
And there were no actual gay people, and they made a lie about that. So,
Not to be like, oh, that's just the way it was. But when you're going back in time, especially to 1980, whatever, that is what you're going to see.
Yeah, I think it was kind of more in the 90s when there started to be a lot more movies that were at least attempting to be accepting of gay people, essentially.
Gay people, any people of color.
Although Paris is Burning came out in 1990.
I am unfamiliar.
So what? How could you consider yourself part of the LGBT community and not have seen Paris is Burning?
Never even heard of it.
Crystal Balenciaga?
Sorry.
It is about balls, like drag balls, although it was not exclusively drag at the time. It was, people who were gay or transgender or just straight, but was heavily people of color, and people could just be whoever it was they were in a way that they probably couldn't in most of their life,
Put it on the list.
Yeah. It's a documentary about like the ball scene. I think even if you don't love it, which it's fine if you don't, it is a piece of cultural history that everyone ought to see. Well, maybe not everybody, because some people are terrible, gross people.
Is it Yestalgia?
Yes. Yestalgia. I said that from the first 5 minutes of watching it. I like this movie quite a bit.
I thought that you were quite troubled over it. I could have missed
I am, but in a good way. I mean, one of my favorite genres is horror, so me being disgusted or traumatized or anything by something doesn't mean that's bad at all for me.
I understand. It was sort of like, okay, even though I gave this movie a big fat fucking hell no, I will never stop talking about Repo Genetic Opera, Drew.
I had to hold myself back from mentioning it in this one.
No, I understand. If it makes you feel something, then it's worth it.
I think, call this Yestalgia. I do want to put in it that there might be some trigger warnings, right? Like if I were to recommend this film to somebody, I would probably give them trigger warnings. And to be fair, I probably should have for you guys, but I do think that it is witty and funny, and
Yes.
love the color story thing they do. I think it's great. I don't think it's a perfect movie for sure, but generally speaking, I'd say Yestalgia.
Yestalgia for me. Just real quick, I do want to say that I am so refreshed and relieved by the fact that there are 3 people in the same room that are unaffected by puritanical propaganda. I will happily look at a piece of media very critically and say, I loved it despite blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
I think all 3 of us are on the same page, and that's why I am loving, and I'm going to love this podcast. So yeah,
Cool.
Basically Yestalgia for me. I will say in the beginning, no, it was not that way. I had to let it absorb. If I were to have watched this movie and then immediately gone into recording with you guys, I would have been like, what the fuck, Basil? Why did you make me watch this?
That is the thing. I do feel like I should have given you guys a little bit more.
It wasn't necessarily because of the quote-unquote problematique content. It was because of the direction. It was because of the movie itself.
But I could have at least given you a better idea about what it was about before we watched it, you know?
No worries.
All right. So that is pretty much it for us for Heathers now. Do we want to do any nostalgia things that we have been into? So I finished watching the Yu Yu Hakusho live action, and yeah, as long as you go into it knowing it's going to be kind of silly and campy the way that an anime normally is, it's fun. Like, it is just fun to watch. The costumes, I know I keep talking about costumes for everything, but the costumes are excellent. I love them. And it has a very strong look in general, in a way to kind of bridge that gap between an animated character that's very exaggerated and a real human character that is real. So they do a very good job with that. I started back up reading the Throne of Glass series, and I feel a little embarrassed saying it, but if you like kind of trashy, fun-ish reads that are kind of romance-based, it's good for that, is what I'll say. So yeah, that's my nostalgia stuff. Drew, did you want to throw yours out?
Yeah. I actually don't have a non-anime pick in this episode, but I've been watching Bleach, Thousand Year Blood War. Season 2.
Is that like an offshoot of normal show Bleach?
It's technically the last arc of the show. The show was, I guess, canceled before they made the last arc of the manga into the show. So that's what they're doing now.
With like a new animation studio and stuff? Or
I think it's the same studio. I had to look into that. But yeah, Ichigo's back, being the most powerful character in the show as usual, but it's all good. And everyone's showing off their powers versus the new old enemies, the Quincy's.
I don't know that much about Bleach.
I was thinking anyone who knows Bleach will know what that means.
Yeah. My friend dressed up as one of the characters one time for an anime convention, but that's all I know, really. And I can recognize the main characters, but yeah, that's it. Amanda, do you have anything you want to recommend or just talk about what you've been watching or reading or whatever? Listening to?
I did have to watch the Heathers during liquor inventory with a acquaintance. Yeah, no, you guys, I've been watching Pete the Damn Cat and what else? The 2018 Grinch movie over and over. I get told what to watch. So, yeah.
That's all right. You do what you can when you can. So that is it for the Yestalgia podcast. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.
See you later.
Bye.